I mean, architecture is art. And I think art, good art, makes us feel good.
It has an effect.
It has an effect, right? I believe architecture has an effect in everybody. Nowadays, to be an architect, you need to be much more than just an artist. You need to understand how the world works.
Is London revered in any way for architecture?
No, definitely. I think London is my favorite city, actually. It's like a tapestry of all of these different boroughs that add different dynamics to the entire London area.
Yeah, and those weird moments like the Blitz, what would London be like without the Blitz?
For me, Mexico City, it's incredible. The pre-Hispanic heritage that still lives on, it's incredible. And I think that's huge part of our identity today.
And there's Aztec buildings remaining?
Yeah, there are buildings, but actually the Spanish were quite super brutal. They had this Templo Mayor, they dismantle and they use the actual rocks of the Aztecs temple. And then they built a Catholic church on top of it. So yeah, it was quite ruthless.
As you can see, we've moved up in the world this week with a tie. That's what we like. And our guest this week is Fernando Sordo Madaleno, one of the third generation working in a family firm. I know what that feels like. The architectural firm Sordo Madaleno, which is very well known in Mexico. Fernando recently relocated to London to spearhead the firm's establishment internationally, also taking on many projects in the Middle East. He feels that London really is the place to internationalize, which is always nice to hear. He takes us on a fascinating tour of his philosophy of architecture, including how architects are artists but can't work in isolation, how they need to be informed not just by other people but the surrounding context and culture of the building, and why great buildings need to be thought about at the human scale. Yes, he explains what that means, rather than driven by the architect's or client's ego, and why you should always try to think of ways to create a benefit to society and the immediate community with any building project. In his world, applying these three principles means you have a chance of becoming a great architect, not just a good one. It's a fascinating chat. Check it out. Hello and welcome to Business Without Bullshit. I am Andy Ori, and today we are joined by Fernando Sordo Madaleno. Fernando is partner and director of architectural firm Sordo Madaleno, a firm that has been shaping Mexico's architectural landscape for over 80 years. His work blends creativity, urbanism, and architecture to push the boundaries of real estate development, which have put him at the helm of an award-winning projects across the globe, from Dominican Republic to Thailand, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. Each one has defined the relationship between the design and urban life. Fernando, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for the invite, Andy.
No problem. So we're going to start with something easy, Fernando. I'm just going to ask you a load of simple questions you'll know the answers to, and we just have quick answers to, just to get to know you a little bit better, give the audience a chance to orientate themselves. So what was your first job, Fernando?
My first job was actually as a draftsman at the family studio. So, yeah.
And a draftsman's the person who draws?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And what was your worst job?
My worst job, probably, I love what I do, actually, and I love every bit of it. So specifically a job, I would say, it's probably, spending just overtime and overnights, working on architecture, because I've been dedicated all my life to this job, right? So.
Yeah. Okay. So what your worst job is you love your architecture, not doing it. Is that it? Doing the admin almost.
Yes. On operations, all of that.
Yeah. It's fun. Favorite subject at school?
History.
I agree. What is your special skill, Fernando?
I think I'm creative.
Creative. Very nice. And what did you want to be when you grew up?
An architect, actually.
Always?
Yeah,
okay.
always.
Wow. Inspired, I guess, by your father and grandfather, did you?
Yes.
That's the difference of working in an accounting business, ladies and gentlemen. You don't want to be it when you grew up. My dad didn't, I didn't. What did your parents want you to be?
Actually, my father was pushed to architecture in a way, so he didn't want to do that for us. So actually, they were always super supportive. on whatever we chose.
So he was almost like, do whatever.
Yeah.
Anything but architecture. You were like,
Exactly.
Dad, I want to do architecture.
And now two of us are architects, so
Brilliant.
It worked.
Do you ever do karaoke? Have you got a go-to karaoke song?
Yeah, I would say Hotel California. Yeah,
Good
Bagels,
song.
That's
yeah,
amazing.
that's an amazing song. Office dogs. I don't know if you have any in the office. Office dogs, business or bullshit?
I think business, man.
Business. Yeah, I agree. I guess not, but have you ever been fired?
No.
And what is your vice? So a vice is,
Definitely work, man.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, you're a workaholic.
Yeah. My wife would, support that statement.
Okay. So that's the end of the quickfire round. That's lovely. That gives us a sense. So just give us an overview of what you're up to at the moment, Fernando. Let's have a sense of what's going on.
Well, I mean, lots of changes have happened in the last few years, right? So we moved my wife and myself to London. So I mean, we started the international studio of architecture from our family firm, and that's been super exciting. And living in a city like London has been an incredible experience.
And what led to this expansion? Why expand?
I mean, as you said and mentioned at the beginning, is Sordo Madaleno has been consolidating a lot of its portfolio in Mexico during the 87 years that the studio has been on practice. And, I always saw it, us as the third generation, that we wanted to become more international. And really that ambition was because I love to do architecture. And I love history, and I love to get to learn about other cultures. So, my ambition was to become an international architecture firm. And what's more international than London, right?
Well, that's nice of you to say. But give us a sense, I mean, for listeners, I guess, outside of Mexico, who is Sordo Madaleno? What is Sordo Madaleno? I mean, other than an architectural firm, we're talking about generations here.
Well, for me, Sordo Madaleno, the studio, it's almost part of our DNA. So, for 3 generations, it was founded by my grandfather, and it's a part of our identity.
You mean as a Mexican, or you mean as a
family?
As a family, right?
As a family, it's almost our trade. You know what I mean? It's like you have that family of stonemasons, and that trade is passed on generations, because we're really passionate about the power of architecture, and the changes and things that it can provoke to a specific place. And I mean, Sordo Madaleno does, from single family homes to mixed use developments to huge master plans. So we do a little bit of everything. And, as we say in architecture, it's all about the human scale. Doesn't matter the size of the project, but as you really understand the human scale, that's the end goal of
What's human scale?
When you're talking about a specific space that is designed for us, people, and how that changes depending on the type of project that you're doing, right? So if you're doing a huge master plan and you're designing a city, then you need to consider, how wide the different street blocks or the, need to be depending
for humans.
For the human. Yeah.
Because this is a bit like you're saying how your urban landscapes shapes humanity. I mean, at a smaller level, it's ensuring that you build things around humans.
Yeah, not cars, for example.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so that's what the human scale means. Because you could build LA. You could say, well, there's no. I mean, you go to some cities in America, there's no sidewalk. It's just cars. And it's very strange to an English person.
No, definitely. I think it's. Nowadays, the priority is how we live, the quality of life. And I believe good planning, good urban planning, or good architecture can definitely, it helps a lot, in that sense.
Well, there's 2 bits, isn't there? Urban planning is kind of how the cars and the people move. And then there's the buildings and what they look like.
Yeah. So you have those 2 layers, right? You have like the private buildings, and then you have the infrastructure. So if you think the infrastructure as the nervous system, for example, and then the buildings, these different components that are being linked. So I think those two things, they need to be integrated on the best part. I think that is a really interesting question in the sense of, how private buildings can actually make the public realm better.
Yeah, I think I find it very interesting, that suggestion you're making, that this effect it has.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think good architects, they look beyond their projects. So if, for example, if you get a commission of a building, you really need to understand everything. It's not about just the program, or if it's an office building, the people that are going to work within that. You really need to understand the culture, the way of working, the social dynamics, just legacy, history, memory, all of these things that are not technical.
Do you think a lot of, if I was being cynical, architecturally, you can go into a building and you go to reception, you use the toilet, you go to a meeting, you walk out. Do you know what I mean? Most people aren't really picking up on, most people won't even notice it. Will they even feel it? But it's important, do you think, that you bring out those elements, those artistically?
Yes. Architecture is art for me, and I think art, good art makes us feel good. If you look at a painting that you like, or if you're into music,
it has an effect.
It has an effect, right? Yeah. Music has an effect on you, Andy. And I believe architecture has an effect in everybody, but maybe some are more sensible to what architecture, especially mean. But I believe that everybody interacts with architecture. So you don't really like to be in a really dark, cold room. You know what I mean? So you always are looking for, natural light, to be comfortable in terms of temperature. And all of that can be, just good design. You can create solutions to all of those simple problems with good design, right?
I'm obviously more familiar with London than I am with Mexico City and things. But, are there examples of cities with terrible architecture that you think sort of affects the city?
No, I think when we're talking about cities, obviously there are many things are involved in the planning of a city. If you go to Latin America, the expansion of population has been, exploding. So that brings challenges in terms of water, public transportation, all of these things, because we tend to go farther and farther away from the source. That's probably downtown and the center of the city. So that really creates challenges, no? And but I think, small mechanisms, and I would argue that ideas so simple, like in London, for example, that you have the basements, that actually you probably have, 10%, 20% more square meters of, spaces.
Basements are quite common in London offices like we're in right now.
Exactly. And we're in a basement, and this is a pretty nice space. You have natural light.
Yeah, basements are less common, I guess, in a lot of cities. They build on top of the ground because they're expensive.
Definitely, because you have a good transportation system. So you don't need to have, underground parking, for example. Yeah. So that's a good decision.
Yeah, right. And also a lot of London is clay, which enabled us to have the tube, and probably means that digging a basement isn't as expensive as it is when it's granite. You know what I mean? So, and then because of the clay, tall buildings wobble more, and so therefore maybe they were like, well, we're better to dig down. I don't know the history of it. I mean, I could think of a town that every time I go to, much as I love it, sorry, Icelandic friends, but Reykjavik. I mean, Reykjavik, it's got some nice buildings now, like the Opera House and stuff. But God, when I used to go there 20 years ago, because basically the city was sort of built like that in the 70s. It's a bit like when you get those post-war, it's like, we just need to get it up.
Exactly.
We don't care, fill of cement, we don't care. But actually, I'm sorry, Reykjavik, but there are bits of Reykjavik that they're just all like the most boring 70s buildings, and it, has a negative effect, I guess.
No, of course. And that's what I mean in the Latin American cities. But the other interesting part that maybe London doesn't have, but the Latin American cities have, is that the lack of control in some ways generates really interesting moments, right? So
You mean the lack of planning permission?
Yeah. Because if you go to, if you go to these little towns in Italy, if you go there as a guy that is urban planning in London and has fire and safety regulations and mobility strategies, they would go crazy, right? Because nothing works. But for them, it works because it was almost like instinct and just common sense that how you create, a street and then the height of the building. And that brings, a really interesting romantic side to architecture, right? Because these little towns are amazing.
So actually you can get some really nice it may not be fulfilling all the requirements that if someone comes up with a sort of list of all of these are all the things that we have to do in order to, and you just let them get on with it.
Yeah. I think it's a matter of how organically can that town or city be developed, no? Because the problem with the Latin American cities, for example, is that the pace, and this is going back to my previous idea, is the pace of growth, that just, outgrows the planning and all of these strategies because of the timing and all of this. But I think London has been developed through centuries,
Yeah, and those weird moments like the Blitz, what would London be like without the Blitz? I mean, it was a terrible event in history and in London's history, but it meant that we got to rebuild, and there's all sorts of things that would not exist. And actually, what is it that's nice about London? And there's other cities like this, but it's the mix. It's the mix of whether it be, an economic mix or, an architectural mix, the sort of, the old is next to the new is next to the ugly, it's a sort of strange city like that. I mean, and just putting my Union Jack underpants on and my London hat for a moment, is London revered in any way for architecture? I mean, is it that, for an architect, there are certain cities that are really amazing or not?
No, definitely. I think London is my favorite city, actually.
Oh, wow. Okay, there's an accolade. So, Heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks. Podcast over.
Exactly. I think we can wrap up things. Yeah, because I think, it's history that I, truly love. And then, it's super interesting because, as you're saying, it's like a tapestry of all of these different boroughs that add different dynamics to the entire London area. You can have all these central areas, but then you have amazing parks, amazing public space. You have the river. That for me, the river it's an incredible asset.
Yeah, when you don't have Brussels doesn't have a river or water, doesn't have a water feature. When someone says that to you, you're suddenly like, oh yeah, because how do you see a city? I mean, there's curious things, isn't it? That the ground make it up, like New York's granite, so they could build these huge buildings. We're clay, so we couldn't build the really tall buildings until they more recently worked out how to do it. What's Mexico City like? That's your home, isn't it? Yeah. What's that like?
I mean, it's incredible. And I actually wrote a piece in that's super interesting because I talk about Mexico, just from my experience. And it was, I believe, in the 1400s when the Spanish Armada came to Mexico, they came to see a beautiful city that was sitting on top of a lake. You're surrounded by volcanoes. That would have been the best sight
because it's in a valley. I have been many years ago, but yeah.
So the city actually, the lake is now dry because everything is built now. And obviously, we have a huge problem because in terms of foundations as well, where everything is mud. So
wow,
yeah. So
and you've got 30 million people, or it's huge.
Yeah, no, it's 22 million.
22 million.
Yeah, and it's crazy. But for me, Mexico City, it's incredible. I mean, it's quite similar to London in the sense of you have all of these boroughs or barrios, as we call them in Mexico, where you have Roma, Condesa, Polanco, Juarez, all of these really interesting parts of the city where you have beautiful restaurants, you have art galleries, museums, all of colonial
And
buildings.
is there architecture before the Spanish? You said it was a city before they turned out, or is that all gone?
No. Well, they actually built on top of it. It's sort
Because
of
who was it before the Spanish? It would have been indigenous.
the Aztecs, right?
Aztecs.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. The amazing, like the people who were still ahead of us.
No,
and then we turned up with our diseases, spread them around a bit.
Exactly.
Brilliant.
That's correct. So, I mean, it's, the pre-Hispanic heritage that still lives on. It's incredible. And I think that's huge part of our identity today.
And there's Aztec buildings remaining, or is it more ruins?
There are buildings, but actually, like, the Spanish were quite super brutal.
They didn't understand our modern perspective back then, did they? They were just like flatten it.
Yeah. And, they had like this Templo Mayor. They built a cathedral on top. They dismantle and they use the actual rocks of the Templo Mayor, the Aztecs temple. And then they built a Catholic church on top of it. So, yeah, it was quite ruthless. And so, yeah, you just get some hints around Mexico City of what it used to be. But actually, I think in many ways, it brought some conscious to us as Mexican architects and city planners, because in many ways, we had a lot of missed opportunities. I mean, we used to have lots of rivers that now are, just streets and highways. And then we used to have a lake, and now, it's completely dry. And there was going to be a Norman Foster airport going in Lago Texcoco that got scrapped, and then now it's a park, I believe. But it's, we always think of, imagine what that could have been, and so that's always on the back of our mind, because we have huge problems with water. I mean, who doesn't, right? But in Mexico, we get or no water, or we get tons of it at the same day.
Sort of flooding and all that.
Yeah. Like in terms of the amount of rainfall you get in Mexico versus London, I think it's quite similar. But in Mexico, it
all happens in one day, does it?
Yeah, like everything happens in 3 months or 2 months.
Wow! And within this city of Mexico, I mean, there's some buildings that are well known. That's your family, isn't it? Your father or your grandfather built or are designed anyway.
Yes, correct. I mean, my grandfather had an amazing career.
What's he most known for? If people looked it up, was there a particular building?
Yes, I mean, he has one building that is in the permanent collection at the MoMA in New York. So, wow. Yeah.
Wait, how can you put a building in?
No, a picture.
A picture, right.
Of the building.
Right. Ship it in, John. It'd be very American, wouldn't it? Get me London Bridge and that building from Mexico.
Get me a piece of it. No, the actual picture that are original from that building, it was 1974.
What's it called, the building?
It's called Palmas, so the name of the street, and the number is 555, so 555. It's quite known in the architectural world, but you can look it up.
And it was innovative, was it? It was.
Yeah. They call it the pretemblado. That means that that it was previously impacted by a earthquake, because all of the slabs are shifting.
Oh, what? It was built and had an earthquake?
No. Like, it looked like.
To look like. Oh,
yeah,
how cool.
So, yeah.
That's well cool. They must have been building it going like, he's bugging the designs up here,
These guys are making it all wrong. But imagine in 1974 that everything it was in the modernist movement. So modernist movement is all about this rigorous repetition. It's super simple object type Seagram building in New York by Mies van der Rohe, for example.
Right.
And then, you have my grandfather coming up with this building that's actually shifting and moving.
I think this idea of things inspiring you is really interesting. I was just with my dear little daughter at my mum's house, and my mum and dad, being in their 80s, bless them, have got furniture like they've got proper furniture like pre-IKEA. But, the table legs curve and they've got like things on it and they've got a dining table, nothing's from IKEA, and that's, obviously this is inside a house, but it's a bit like that with architecture. Is your statement about, architects there to inspire. Ultimately, buildings are so functional to us. They need to keep us warm, dry, But there's something quite deep in what you're saying about, It's work, a building is a piece of art. It can sit and change how people think and how they feel. The importance of this city looking good. And when I'm building a building, whether that be in Bristol, London, wherever, there's an element at which that maybe investing in it looking amazing is valuable to society. You're not just writing a check.
No, definitely. I mean, look, when every time you see London, like being published or visit London in other parts of the world, the images of London, most of it are of their buildings.
Yes.
You always see the Gherkin.
Yes, you will see the Gherkin.
Yeah, then you have the Tower Bridge. All of the Westminster.
It's what defines it. It's actually, it's always this. And actually, if you go to Kolkata in India, they had a thing that they will try to look like London, but there's sort of pictures of, they were like, this is what the skyline needs to look like. And I was like, oh, I'm amazed that's aspirational. I thought it was all about skyscrapers,
Yeah, but I think it's more than that, because you could never be London. No, I think the interesting part of working in different parts of the world is really understanding the DNA of that place. Mm-hmm. And, in the sense of thinking that good architecture costs like more, I wouldn't agree, because you need to be more smart in terms of the resources or the material use. For example, if you're doing a building in London, you can do a beautiful building with, cheap materials, reclaimed brick, for example. And that could be super lovely. It could be interesting and had a lot of personality. So I think it's not, because in some of our projects that we don't do like typical buildings. Also, some of them, we try to challenge always the typology. If we're doing a school, we're doing a school that can turn into a community center and a public park for that community. If we're doing an institutional building for a football club, we're creating much more than a building. We're creating a community, a hub. That creates these public spaces.
Yes, what they're buying.
That's like added value that you bring to the client. And actually, the best thing that you can get back from it is like the client saying, really, that public space that we didn't have it in the brief or at the beginning, that program is the soul of the building, of the community, of the people working in there.
It's hard to persuade people sometimes.
Yes, but I mean, I think because your track record really needs to speak for itself. So if you say we have this idea and this worked, then it's better to. You have more to your advantage. So all of
this. Yes, that's effectively the Sordo Madaleno brand.
Yeah,
that
exactly.
I'm buying you to that. You don't come to us and ask me for a box.
No, definitely. And I mean it's because it's not about the box, And I think the clients now understand that it's not about the building. It's about the people that use the box.
Yes. Yes. So that's back to, it's about the humans.
Yeah, it's about the humans.
It's about the humans and focusing on a space that they appreciate, enjoy, use, is functional, flows,
And it doesn't need to be more expensive. I think the notion that good architecture is more expensive, I mean, I don't agree with that, in the sense that it needs to be, it needs to be smart for the client, but for the people that use it as well. And this is just to be mindful about the resourcing of the materials you're using. They need to be local. Everything needs to be more efficient, and really pick where you believe that, the spots or places or spaces that would give a little bit of a better quality to the people that are working on that building or living. For example, I can mention a school, that I'm really excited about, because it's the first school we're doing in our history. 87 years, man.
Wow.
It's our first
Where
school.
have you been?
Yeah. And I believe education is probably, one of the least interesting buildings that
it's true, very functional often. In this country.
Super functional, repetition. I mean, there's no place of creativity on those buildings. No?
I mean, how many people listening to this went to school with buildings that were supposed to be temporary that ended up there for 70 years,
100%. And you always have these big blocks, and then you have an open courtyard. and you're always within fences, right? You're within walls. It's almost like you're in jail. I don't know. It feels like you're, you're captive.
Yeah.
And so we started to really digest these problems and how we could come up with a solution. So that specific project was sitting in a suburban area where we had a lot of housing. So it wasn't in the middle of a city. It was on the outskirts. And what we start to understand is they didn't have any public spaces, all the housing units around the plot of land that we were assigned to do the school. But all of these families were going to send their kids. So the idea was, okay, what more can we give to that community? So that school becomes a community center and an open space, a public park, because schools are from 9 to 3. Or 8 from 3. So then it opens up to the whole community, and obviously on the weekends. And I believe the typology of schools are one of the better equipped in terms of infrastructure.
Yeah, and there's also something peaceful about it.
Yeah.
I mean, in Trinidad, where my father-in-law was a professor, they grew up on St. Augustine, which is a big university, but it's also a park, and it's one of the few areas you can walk around in Trinidad that's sort of safe and stuff. But it's almost like there's quite a lot of crime in Trinidad. But the sense I got when I was there was more like, almost everybody respects education, or everyone respects sort of, there's economic. It's like if you had a park that didn't have kids in it, or sort of didn't allow kids, then what would that bring? You know what I mean?
Definitely.
The wrong thing, maybe, And I mean, also the thing, we touched on it before, but I think it's really interesting is that, that you're not designing a building, you're designing something for humans. So.
Yeah. And I think, nowadays, all of us need to talk about sustainability, right? So if you're going to do a building, it needs to give more, than just one single purpose. It needs to serve multiple purpose.
Rather than it's got a wind turbine on the roof, it's more make it useful or make it usable all the time.
All the time, right? Because you cannot do a building and just be used half of the time. It needs to, you need to activate those buildings.
Do you think a Mexican architect or architectural firm brings something special to the global stage somehow?
I think so. I definitely think so. And that's why I made the decision to come here.
Is that to do with Sordo Madaleno, or is that to do with Mexican culture? Or
no, you cannot separate Mexican culture from Sordo Madaleno. I mean,
really?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely part of our identity and our history. And I think Mexico has lots of things to offer. It's because I think there's definitely a richness to the culture. I mean, the pre-Hispanic history, the colonial, and then now the modern Mexico, and that, mixed of all of these things happening in between.
It's fascinating, Mexico. And actually, we just know so little about it in Britain. It's almost not part of our history so much. It's part of Spanish history.
And I think you should go to the National Gallery, actually. There's
in Mexico.
No, here. In London, because there's an exhibition by Jose Maria Velasco. It was this amazing landscape artist, painter, incredible. And you can definitely catch a glimpse of just Mexico.
Well, it's sort of the meeting of this sort of meeting of three worlds, isn't it? You've got the sort of European influence, you've got this sort of massive North American influence, and then you've got the South American influence. It's just sort of like...
No, it's crazy. Yeah. And I mean, I always joke about this fact that when the Aztecs, because the myth is that they were looking for an eagle eating a snake on top of a nopal, right? From a cactus.
They were looking for an eagle eating a snake
on top of a cactus.
Wow.
All right. So that's the mythological idea. And they found that in an island in the middle of a lake in a volcano surrounded area,
they found this artifact.
Yeah, the eagle, that's the mythology.
Right.
But it's just that it's crazy because there are earthquakes. You have like 60 volcanoes. You have, flooding. I mean, it's probably the worst place that you can think about establishing.
Quite a few cities like that.
Civilization, man.
Yeah.
I mean, London, they established it because it was the most narrow part of the river, right? And they built
we got the Romans, I think, to thank for Londinium.
Exactly,
and it's a lucky city like that it's sort of fortuitously placed on some levels. I mean, I find like what you're talking about is mad. When you look at the map, the amount of cities that live in like massive danger zones, it's crazy. Yeah. You wouldn't plan it there. But the thing is, they build the city and they think this is going well.
Yeah.
50 years later, there's an enormous earthquake and they're like, oh, bloody hell, might have got the placing wrong. And what's it like, I'm a third generation in a family business. How do you find it?
I mean, it's definitely been an amazing experience up to date. And I mean, I believe, my grandfather really, laid the foundations. And then my father, I think he's a super special person. We admire him a lot. And I think his education to us was always like, so easy in many ways, in the sense of, you do what you think you want to do and I'll be supporting you. So I think that's the best way to really, nurture a third generation.
Do you feel the shadow of your dad or your grandfather? Do you feel it? Some people, I don't, but someone asked me this the other day who's in a family business saying, do you feel in the shadow?
No, not really. Actually, because my father had the same question asked to him. Because my grandfather was an amazing architect, and then, my father is an amazing architect, and they always ask these questions. But really, I found it super odd because I've never even feel like anything like it. I don't feel really any pressure. Actually, I think we are in an amazing position. As the third generation, and with my two brothers and myself, leading the business has been incredible. I think everybody has found what they're good at. And I think we've been doing a really interesting team.
It was curious when I was asked that question because I had to think about it. I was saying, no, I've never been made to feel like that. But maybe a bit like you, my dad's never made me feel bad about what I do. I didn't want to join the business. But I had to sort of think about it because I was like, no, but he's always been very supportive and very complimentary. He's not been like, you're no good at this or something. But I don't know. So I think there's different elements to that. I mean, the old stories, though, the third generation is supposed to mess it up. Are you aware of this? Clogs to clogs.
No, I've heard of that.
Yeah. We've just had the fourth generation join here. So I don't know whether that means we're out the woodwork. I don't know.
Definitely. I think so, Andy.
What's been the biggest challenge expanding internationally, do you think?
I mean, because it's something super personal. Architecture and what Sordo Madaleno is. It's really, it's our family's work. So I want to keep it personal, and having two different locations, it's definitely a challenge.
Because this is the first time the family have expanded outside of Mexico.
Yes, that's correct.
Right.
And so working in two time zones, it's complicated, and I still develop the design and concept for the Mexican office as well. So, it's kind of crazy with a new baby.
And meanwhile, you're doing work in the Middle East.
Yes.
That's a lot of what you've been doing. Everybody's doing stuff in the Middle East. What's it like doing architecture in the Middle East?
I mean, I think it's in many ways they are trying to get many things right. And I think in many ways they are going in the right direction. I mean, they have been involved with the best minds in architecture and in urban design, and that definitely helps. And I think the challenge there is, as international architects, we really need to understand where are we doing buildings, right? So we need to understand the DNA, because Riyadh, it's not London, or Dubai, it's not London. It needs to have its own character. And that's what people, drives people to visit or to go as tourists. Or tax strategies, right?
Yeah, it's curious. Given architecture is such, I'm trying not to get sidetracked, but given architecture is art, it's an expression. You come from Mexico. This is the place that, for generations you've been, from and heavily involved. Why would they choose someone from overseas who maybe doesn't know much about the Middle East or Riyadh or wherever? Is the first thing you then have to do is really learn about the place? Is that the first, you just get on the plane and sit and learn, you know?
Yeah, and research and talking to the people that actually live there and have lived there for all their lives. I mean, we were involved in a competition in Scandinavia, and the first thing was, let's interview a person from Finland. You know, it's like, please tell me your experience living.
Were they chatty? They're not always chatty, the Finns.
Yeah, amazing. Laura, she's a great friend. And I mean, it because all of that really gives you the clues onto what the project should be. Because we cannot think ourselves as sculptors or as painters, you know, because their works of art are, you know, works of art that can be sitting in a amazing flat in London or in a house in Italy, or, you know, you can have a sculpture anywhere, right? But the building, that's what I find quite interesting. It needs to sit where it needs to sit.
Yeah,
right? Can't move, man. And then,
wow.
But it needs to speak about the place, and that's why I'm fascinated by history, because every single time you go to these little towns in Italy, or you know, these little places.
Oh yeah, there's a lot of Swiss information Alps. If you look.
Yeah, there's a lot of information, and you know, it's all about, you know, just making the right decisions. Sometimes as architects, we overcomplicate our thought process because we want to become more technical or try to innovate, when really, for me, innovation is like understanding the place, the things that are of that place, and then maybe bringing them a little bit a step further.
Do you find you sort of have these clicks in your head? Okay.
Yeah. So everything starts to make sense. So it's part of the process. And sometimes you take 2 steps forward, you then step 1 step back. No, and that's the process that I'm really interested in. And that's why, you know, we now have a really strong research area in the studio, because I think as good architects, you need to take seriously, you know, all the research, the context, and not just the superficial stuff, but really in depth, you know. And that's because that's how people, you know, the appropriation of a building is when they feel identified to it, you know. So acting in different places, it's definitely a challenge, no? Because if it's not your culture, then you need someone to guide you, right?
I mean, it makes me think of a really stupid, annoying question, but it's an interesting one to just pose. Is because it's just so ubiquitous. But AI, what's AI going to? Is AI going to do something to architecture? You know,
I think it's doing it already, really, in many ways. You know, as I've said, architecture is art, right? And AI, it's a computer that processes images. So, in personally speaking, because I could not generalize my ideas to the general architecture world, but for me, you know, AI is architecture of images, not about spaces, really. And
give me some ideas. Would you almost say to AI, here's some inputs and some stuff, generate random things? Or
yeah, because, you know, the computer has this script that takes all of these different images from the web that are pre-existing images, and then just mixes it and puts it together and gives you a result. And that's why I think the research process, all of that, you know, the human side is the really thing that separates good architects from great architects. Because today, I believe they're with AI, everybody can do a beautiful building, you know, that looks nice. But I think a building that really creates change to a community or a specific place, you know, that's where you want to play.
Yeah. And back to this sort of, you design it around humans, and, you know, maybe it's worth going the extra mile to not be too utilitarian about it, and try and make it multifunctional, or try and make it speak to people too. These things are very valuable. Have you got a long-term vision plan, long-term thing you want to achieve?
Definitely to consolidate Sordo Madaleno as a Mexican firm internationally.
put you on the global stage. Like
Yeah.
like you mentioned, Norman Foster did something in Mexico. So is Norman Foster like globally known, is it?
Yes, of course.
Is it? Right. I wouldn't have a sense. I know it's known here, but you know.
No, it's good. Yeah, I think it's amazing what they do at Foster's. It's incredible. And yeah, I mean, I think for us at Sordo Madaleno, I mean, it's we want to do projects elsewhere. You know, that's the ambition, and it's not a business decision. You know, it's just that it's truly our passion. Yeah. You know, we love to do architecture, and that's what really, you know, motivates me to, because architecture is, as all businesses, is complicated, right? It's, you know, it's quite specific architecture.
You most satisfied when you see the finished building, or is it like you see the finished building, you're like, damn it, I should have put that wall over there, or you know.
By that time, I'm already seeing a couple of other projects that I'm excited. Yeah. But no, I think I'm definitely excited, and I have learned, you know, in time to love every single part of the process, because at the beginning I was super inclined into the beginning of the process, the concept, the research, you know, almost when you have that blank page, but that's never a blank page. You know, you have all of this information. You know, you have the culture, you have the history, the memory, you have the materials, you have the weather, you have the, you know.
What I love is, and you obviously have the right mind for it, is the human brain, the way you just sort of keep giving it bits of information and this idea just starts forming in your head. And then it's sort of like, that's probably all you can see. And then you go see the client and they're like, no, I want a purple basement or something. And you're like, no.
And you get like emotionally attached to the proposal.
you know, please. Oh, that's hard.
No, yeah, because at the end of the day, it's not our job. It's, you know, it's definitely something that we love to do as architects, because you need to love it. Because it's
hard.
It's super hard.
And you've got to fight for your idea to keep it alive, I imagine, as it starts going through the stages.
Yeah, and I think that's one, you know, when I was, at school, you know, I really fought for my ideas because I thought I was always right. But then in time, sometimes the client is right. And that's interesting because, you know, we're not this isolated, independent artists that are working, you know, in this like surreal world. We have clients, we have people that we need to respond to, and that actually we need to talk to them, because I mean, they are doing a huge investment on the building. So many times is, you know, it's their family home that they're going to spend all their lives there. So sometimes it needs to be more about the people than, you know, the idea of architecture as this super technical object, beautiful.
Ideas are very possessive. I mean, I work with my father, and we would come, you know, I'd learned this from him. I remember saying to him years ago, it's like, when that thing, you give your brain a load of information, it does its thing, it comes up with something. It's really hard if someone else goes, no, it should be like this. It's like, it's like this, you know, but it's trying to take someone on that journey, isn't it? You know, it's like, it's I don't know, because someone say to me, isn't that ego? And I was like, no, I think there's something very possessive about ideas. I think if you have the kind of brain that likes coming up with ideas, which you must do, you know, and I certainly relate to, then someone telling you that it should be something else is really hard to program in. But like you say, with maturity, feedback of like, you know, just makes you reprocess it.
Definitely. And you know, that saying that they say that, you know, good architecture is a good client, or a good client's good architecture. I mean, that's, you know, and he understands, or she understands, the value in architecture. You know?
Yes.
Because, you know, I think nowadays, to be an architect, you need to be much more than just an artist. You need to understand, you know, how the world works. You know, you need to absorb all the information that you can get, because if you're doing an office building for a developer, you know, and you're saying, okay, I want to create 20% extra area for communal spaces where people can relax. Okay, that's going to cost a lot. But what if that 20% is going to generate another income that is actually a co-working space that is going to be extended to everyone?
What's your advice to work with an architect? Because certainly the frustration, a lot of people, I've seen it myself too, is you go to someone, they draw a picture, then you say how much, they don't know how much it's going to cost. And then you sort of go on this circle where you get the engineers in, they design it, they come back, it's going to cost 20 million. You're like, no, my budget's 2 million. And you're an architect. What's your advice to someone who's coming to work with an architect? How to approach it?
Yeah, I think you always need to be clear on your ideas. It doesn't need to be a fully formed idea, like a building or how that building.
But say the idea is, I need an office. It needs to fit 100 people in. Whatever.
Yeah. You need to come up with a budget, right?
Yeah.
So you need to say to the architect, okay, this is my budget. And actually, when we have been working on a budget, and that's 99% of the time.
But do you have within your team the engineers and people to understand?
Yes.
Okay. So you are multidisciplined team,
Yes,
are you?
yes.
Okay. Here, it's not integrated here. You'll go to an architect, they won't know. You go around, you find an engineer.
No, we have in-house engineers, but if we want something more sophisticated, we work with consultants, sub-consultants.
But you have internal ones who sit in the office and go, you can't do that, John.
Yes, but as a good architect, you need to know these things before you talk to the engineer. So that's good architecture. When you're thinking of an idea of creating this beautiful large span to create a double height space with lots of light and flexibility, you need to understand the technicality. Because if you see, the greatest architects of our time are the ones that have mastered engineering. Architecture.
Yeah, it must be.
Because it makes sense. I mean, it's not just doing a beautiful building and then talking to the engineer.
And I've learned over time that you need that tension too, that if it was all engineering led, you'd get a boring box all the time. You must make it solid. So the architects needed to push the engineer to say, well, I want it like that. It's the Sydney Opera House is always an example, isn't it? Because they drew this picture of this boat. And it was just, I went to an exhibition because my father-in-law's a civil engineer. He took me there was a V&A exhibition about how they built it and stuff. And he just said, from an engineering perspective, what they did at the time was just unreal. It was totally different. What do you think the biggest problem is with architectural, with the industry at the moment?
I don't like the politics around it.
Interesting. The politics.
Yeah, the politics. And I think I think our work needs to speak for itself. It's all about doing good architecture. Everything that is surrounding that. I'm not so good at it. I would say.
Effectively, you want to get on and do great stuff.
Yeah.
And then what was an example of the sort of the politics or the bullshit?
Ego is it's in architecture. It's huge. And I think we need to go back in many ways to the roots of the purpose. I mean, we are almost like, people that we are here to help, right? I think it's almost like a social practice or profession.
And plus, ego usually stems from insecurity. So I guess one of the benefits or indeed in a way myself working in this family business is, hopefully, you don't feel insecure as Sordo Madaleno. It's like, you come from a family of architects, this is sort of part of your DNA. So hopefully that allows you to not, we've all got ego and ego is important, but ego displays itself badly often if you're trying to prove yourself, but there's a little bit, you're in London now or you're doing it in the Middle East. That's a big step for the business, stepping out into that international world. So, I guess the Middle East is interesting because it's a little more, and excuse me, people from the Middle East, a bit more of a blank sheet. It's a sort of, evolving, isn't it?
Yeah, land of opportunities.
Land of opportunity. Yeah, well put. Did you get involved? I mean, what's happening with Neo and stuff, just to finish up on that? Is that all going ahead still? And,
I think they were restructuring. That's what I heard. I mean,
the pictures were like things from outer space. I don't know who's drawn the pictures, but they're just incredible,
Yeah, no, it's pretty ambitious what they're trying to do in Neom, and specifically the line, right?
The line, yeah. What is the line? It's
that 174 kilometer building in the desert.
174 kilometer building.
It's like 500 meters tall by 200 wide.
And it's 170 kilometers long. Yeah. It can't be. 170.
No. Well, that's the idea. I mean, but they're starting with, I believe, like just a
couple of kilometers.
Yeah, a couple. Just like 3 point.
Yeah. Well, if I was in that meeting, I'd suggest the same. I was like, lovely idea, Roger, but can we just go for a couple of kilometers first, and then let's have a chat about it, shall we? Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. I think they're going ahead. I don't really know much about the project, but
So if you haven't looked up the pictures, people, I mean, it's like something out of a spaceship from Mars. You know, it's something otherworldly.
yeah, and that tells you the ambition of that country. No, it's
Do you know what? Because it's a bit like sport they're using, is that how their buildings are is what people see. Like you say, the skyline of London, the skyline of Dubai, you always see the thingy tower, you know, and it's sort of, that speaks to people in terms of how they feel when they're in the city and stuff. You know, you can't click your fingers like Mexico City and become Mexico City or London. That's got a lot of history.
you need to be you.
You need to be you.
And I think that would be my advice to any architect.
Be you.
Be you. Because that's your secret weapon.
Or be them in a way.
No, in the sense of, I believe right now, because we are, every single day we are in touch with, Pinterest. You have all of these architecture platforms. You're always looking at other architects' work. So it tends to get confusing. And that's why you need to be you. You need to really reflect on your aspirations as an artist, and really understand what you like and what do you want to take away from architecture. Because I think the problem now is that everybody's doing a little bit of the same, I guess. And I think the secret weapon to anybody as an artist is like really looking inside of you and say, okay, what has been your experience? What's your background? No? In my case, I'm from Mexico, and I have that specific background. And I think that's something that actually makes you different. And for me, being here as a Mexican architecture studio, that is our secret weapon. That we are different because of where we come from. And that gives us sort of an edge, right? Because we see things differently, and really understanding the local aspect, then you can produce something interesting.
That's really interesting. That's brilliant. What's the best advice you've ever been given?
Well, this advice was by my father, and is that you need to stay hungry and you need to stay, I can say it in Spanish because it's like slang, right?
Sí.
Siempre novillero. And what does that mean is that, when you're a bullfighter,
yeah.
Okay. So the amateurs of the bullfighting, are called novillero. So is always be an amateur.
Always be the amateur of the bullfighting.
Yeah, like always stay hungry, right? And work doesn't come knocking to your door. You go out and find it.
That's great advice. That's great advice. Any tips for anyone if they're coming to build their business in London, or trying to be an entrepreneur? Any other tips you'd share?
I think it's just navigating the ups and downs. It's been a couple of years now that we started with this idea of opening the London studio.
Oh, and the family were like, "Oh, he's off again." He's been trying to get out of Mexico for years. Oh, he's on about London again.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's just, you need to do it.
Preferably earlier than when your wife's heavily pregnant. And
yeah, that just added an extra layer of complexity to my situation.
He arrived in London, immediately had a baby, started a business with 50 people in it, and then wasn't sure why he was quite stressed out.
Yeah, man, definitely. But I think it's just a matter of doing it, because you're gonna have mistakes, and I think if you just keep at it, and what I find that it's the most important thing is to be passionate about what you are doing. Because what's the end goal of what you're doing? Is it just an economic situation, or it's something that you love to do every single day and that brings you joy? Because at the end of the day, I'm having these terrible meetings, with check-in, cash flows, and all of the tax advice. Not with you, Andy. Those are the most fun. But yeah, I mean, but then I have these moments where now I'm, doing buildings and designing ideas and all of this, and you're always gonna need to put through those bad moments and good moments when you're starting up. I mean, and in Mexico, it has been a smooth ride for us. Well, not a smooth ride as a third generation, but the platform was there. Obviously, I think we've done great on that platform, but here it's completely different, right? Nothing is given, and you need to make a name for yourself, right? So you need to keep hungry. You need to keep knocking doors, and hopefully someone will answer, right?
Well, Fernando, I think you've been absolutely brilliant. If people want to learn more about you, where do they go? sordomadaleno.com or?
Yeah, sordomadaleno.com or, Instagram, Sordo Madaleno, the same thing.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Very nice. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dee. My dog's not here. How very strange. So there you have it. That was this week's episode of Business Without Bullshit. And we will be back next Wednesday. Until then, it's ciao.